Week 2 of training camps around the NFL have wrapped up. We will tell you who the biggest fantasy winners of the week were on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy. On today's show, we're telling you who the biggest fantasy winners are from week 2 of training camps around the NFL. Okay, let's start with the player who I know I've been very critical of, somebody that I've doubted a lot this offseason, Javonte Williams. By every account, it sounds like Javonte Williams is having a fantastic camp in Denver. And that matters because we know Sean Payton's history when it comes to producing fantasy football relevant running backs. What do you think about the Javonte Williams hype?
There has been a lot of Javonte Williams hype. And to your credit, I do think that there are a lot of reasons why you can be very confused about the reports coming out. Now, Javonte Williams, now 18 so months or so out of his ACL tear, which was a complicated one, returned in 2023, had, by all accounts, just one of the least efficient seasons in the National Football League among all running backs. But he came in this offseason, reportedly lost 11 pounds, and apparently, he's got some cutting. He's playing with a little bit more juice. And, all accounts, there's been some hype. Jeremy Fowler, in his latest training camp roundup, says he thinks a career high in rush attempts and targets for Javonte Williams is well within the realm of possibility. Thinks he's going to lean, Sean Payton and company are going to lean pretty heavily on Javonte Williams. So, I think that's the question about Javonte Williams is we know the pathway to fantasy relevance is there. It's just, how much do you trust this guy? What do you think about his 2023 season? Was it purely due to health? Because he did have a very complicated ACL tear. It wasn't just an ACL tear. It was kind of a messy one. And it does take some time to regain trust in your knee, especially for a guy that kind of made his money on forcing missed tackles, for most of his college and career and into his rookie season.
I will say I'm not super excited to draft Javonte Williams or go out and acquire him. However, I'm more open to it now than I was 3 weeks ago when I think we talked about Javonte Williams is one of the guys that we're just avoiding in all of our drafts. It sounds like he has been running as the clear-cut RB1 and everybody else is vying for touches behind him. I think he's in better shape. He's certainly, from every report, it sounds like he's quicker, right? And one thing I think we need to know about this Denver offense, Kate, is that with a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix, or let's say it's Jared Stidham who wins the job, it's one of those two, they're probably going to have to try to run the crap out of the football, right? I don't think they're going to be able to tell Bo Nix, hey, go throw the ball 50 times, and that's how we're going to win. I think they're going to have to be relatively balanced, probably leaning more on the rushing attack, trying to shorten some of these games. And if Javonte Williams is just getting 17, 18, 19 carries every single week, he's going to be a viable RB2. And I kind of like this Denver offensive line. We don't talk about offensive lines very often here on the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, but this is one of the better offensive lines in the league. If they can be competent and Javonte Williams can be quicker and create more explosive plays, I can see a world where Javonte finishes as a top 16 running back. that's much, much higher than my initial expectations.
I think here's probably the interesting conversation because I think we can all paint ourselves a picture of Javonte Williams being fantasy relevant here in 2024 and, possibly, posting that top 15 season. I think 250 touches is once again in the realm of possibilities for Javonte Williams. Though I will say, like, reports on Audric Estime have been absolutely incredible as well. It still seems like Javonte Williams is the RB1. But from a dynasty perspective, let's talk about long term because one of the things we have to acknowledge with Javonte Williams is that he is in a contract year. If things don't work out this year, if he posts anything close to what he did in 2023, I don't care how good he was in his rookie season. I don't care that
Yeah.
he is one of the best and most elusive forced tackle makers in the league. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, if he is not going to have longevity in the National Football League, then his dynasty value is toast. So, like, I do think that that's probably the question mark that I have most about Javonte Williams from a dynasty perspective is the fact that he is in this rookie season. And we've seen running backs, especially like ones that have question marks, right? Like, what is he going to earn in terms of a second deal? And I think if we see anything even relatively close to what we saw last year, the answer is not much.
I guess I mean, this has been kind of the theme all summer, right? Is like the top 12 running backs have a little bit longer of a shelf life when it comes to preserving their dynasty value. Everybody after that is just basically a 1-year rental. And that's just how I view the running back position, right? Like, I'm not looking at Javonte Williams as, okay, what is he going to give me in 2025 and 2026? It's what can he do for me right now? And then I'll figure out the rest once the season happens. So I understand the point. There's certainly a lot of instability there compared to some of the other running backs that are being drafted ahead of him or around him. But I do think things are setting up well for him to see a massive workload this year. I mean, we love Audric Estime, right? Okay, like there's probably not
Yeah,
any
we do.
bigger Audric Estime fans than you and I, but I can see a world where a 5th-round pick doesn't produce big numbers as a rookie, and they're grooming him to be ready to be the lead back in 2025 once Javonte Williams leaves. I do think there's just a chance that Javonte gets a massive workload this year. Denver tries to run the wheels off of him, right? And then they move on next year. That's not the worst case scenario for Javonte Williams. Like, it's just not.
What's absolutely crazy is like trying to figure out the trade market for Javonte Williams right now, I think is a very tricky prospect.
Yes.
Going over to Dynasty League football, there has not been a recorded trade involving Javonte Williams since June. And I think that's probably for all of the reasons that we just mentioned that people have to be a little bit wary of Javonte Williams because I think fantasy managers who already roster him are probably kind of in this realm where we are, where we're like, okay, yes, I can envision a pathway where he is a pretty easy RB2 with RB1 upside any given week. Those that don't roster him might be curious to roster him, but like, how much do you really want to invest in a guy that is in the final year of his contract with health questions? And like, is he really back? Does he really have the juice back that made him such a special rookie to begin with? Like, it is kind of interesting because I can understand why there's not there's kind of a stalemate here. What would you trade for Javonte Williams, if anything, at this point? Like, where do you see the market right now being
I just
valued as
traded Javonte.
RB29 on Dynasty League football in startup drafts?
I just traded him in a league, in a Dynasty League. I traded him for a 3rd-round pick, a 3rd-round rookie pick.
Superflex?
Superflex.
See, that's tricky for me. If you need a running back this year,
well, and let me preface it. This is a very, very short bench league. It's 15 total roster spots. So the roster spot was actually more important to me than the draft pick. But I also wasn't like losing sleep that I gave up Javonte Williams, if that makes sense.
I think that's fair. I think what's just very interesting about Williams is that there is a pretty large realm of possibilities here in terms of what he brings to the table in 2024. I think again, what has me most hesitant is what comes after 2024. But if you're in a position where your roster just needs a weekly RB2, I think Javonte Williams could be kind of like the perfect guy at this point.
All right, Kate. So I have a fantasy draft actually tonight, and one of the players that I'm targeting, we're going to talk about next because he's had a really, really strong camp. Let's talk about Taysom Hill. Shh, don't say it too loud. Next.
Again.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Listen, what are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip the gym. I have to go on a morning walk every day. It just clears my mind. I cannot go without it. But when your schedule is packed with kids' activities or big work projects and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. I know when I skip my little morning walk, I just don't feel right the whole day. But I know it makes me happy. I know I have to fit it into my schedule. But whenever you feel like you have no time for yourself, your non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can go out and win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's talk about Taysom Hill, a 30-year-old do-it-all player for the Saints. I mean, you know him by now. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this podcast has rostered Taysom Hill at least once. But why is this year different?
This year is different, I think, just because of the type of narrative we're getting here with Taysom Hill. And let's be clear, it's not just the training camp hype. Like I'm excited about the training camp hype, but every year I look at what Taysom Hill has been doing in fantasy, and I'm like rolling my eyes because he's got to be one of the most underrated dudes of all time. But here's a write-up from Jeremy Fowler's training camp write-up. The Saints are leaning into the Taysom Hill experience. It could look slightly different than in previous years. After asking around, expectation is Hill could play up to 5 positions, including fullback, running back, quarterback, tight end, and wide receiver. You'll note that 4 of those 5 score you fantasy points.
Yes.
That's pretty nice. Like they want to get him moved around the lineup. And I think that's kind of that's intriguing. You have Juwan Johnson, who's been dealing with injury, and it seems like they're just kind of figuring out ways to get him the ball or make him a focal point of any given play. And that's very intriguing for a position that, I mean, touches for any position are incredibly valuable, but like for a position like tight end, the number of touches and the creativity that you're going to get with those touches, like, yeah, Taysom Hill, once again, pretty intriguing.
And the thing is, Taysom, it's not like this is a new thing where we have to worry about like, will Taysom Hill be a viable fantasy option? Kate, he's been a viable fantasy option. He was tight end 12 last year, and you actually have a good stat about where he's finished over the last couple of years.
He's been a top 12 tight end each of the past 4 seasons, Marcus. That's absolutely crazy. He was the tight end 7 in points per game in 2022, tight end 6 in points per game 2021, tight end 5 in points per game in 2020. He has scored 10 plus fantasy points over in 23 occasions dating back to 2020. That is the 4th most occasions among tight ends, and that is only behind Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and George Kittle. Like, this dude has been incredibly productive. And we should mention, now I think that this is kind of like the most important caveat with Taysom Hill is in Yahoo specifically, listed only as a quarterback. So
No good.
he only has quarterback eligibility, which when you're, kind of measuring that, valuable production, like if your quarterback has only scored 10 plus fantasy points in 23 games since 2020, that's not a great measuring stick. But when you're comparing it to other tight ends, it is. So, like, if you're playing in a Yahoo league, Taysom Hill, not as valuable, but
Not why I would say just undraftable. You're just not drafting Taysom
undraftable.
Hill.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely undraftable. If you have a league in ESPN or on Sleeper, like where he gets that tight end eligibility, he is a cheat code.
And I'll mention on ESPN, as of right now, this can always change. He is being listed as a tight end only on ESPN, but on sleeper leagues, he has quarterback and tight end eligibility. Now, why does that matter? Because there could be situations during a season where, and not probably once all season, where you're rostering one quarterback, he gets scratched at a 4:25 Eastern game. There's no quarterbacks to pick up in the waiver wire. You slide Taysom Hill into your quarterback spot, and then maybe you have a backup tight end. I don't know, Pat Fryermuth that you slide into your tight end spot, and it gets you through a week. Again, probably not likely to happen, and if it does, it happens once. But Taysom Hill can bail you out of a bad situation in a sleeper league. I still think in a ESPN league, Kate, I'm probably not drafting Taysom Hill to be my tight end one per se. But I'm also looking at Taysom Hill like, okay, if I take Taysom Hill and then I draft, let's say Luke Musgrave, who's more of an upside play, and maybe I play Taysom Hill early in the year until Luke Musgrave becomes a more consistent option. I think you've managed to cobble together a very good tight end room without having to spend much draft capital at all. I think Taysom Hill is really interesting. And I should mention in dynasty leagues right now, he currently is not being drafted inside the top 45 tight ends on Dynasty League football right now. And he's a year in, year out top 12 tight end option. Just a massive value. And it sounds like, Kate, he could see even more work than we're used to seeing.
Yeah, pretty incredible that this guy just kind of goes under the radar. And I do think like part of that, right, is people are not comfortable with this kind of weird hybrid. I mean, Taysom Hill is his own position, right? Like he is not a traditional tight end. And I think that people are a little hesitant to buy into because, like, at any given moment, like, yes, he's also listed, he could also play quarterback at any given moment. Are they going to relegate him back more to a traditional quarter? Like, it just feels uncertain. But I think there's probably nothing more certain than the fact that they just want to center this offense in a big way around Taysom Hill, who's probably one of the most versatile players,
Yes.
Versatile skill position players in the NFL right now.
I want in. You also look at the Saints offense, Kate. Obviously, we love Chris Olave. Like draft Chris Olave very, very high. We like Rashid Shaheed as like a nice complementary player, right? But
With a
Alvin
ton of
Kamara,
upside on a
ton of
weekly
upside.
basis, for sure.
Alvin Kamara is getting older. Jawan Johnson has an injury. Who knows how long he might be out for? They just might be relying on Taysom Hill. I mean, conservatively, they get 8 touches a game, 10 touches a game. And we saw this last year. Like he had multiple games with double-digit carries, multiple games, right? And those weeks he can give you 24, 25 fantasy points. There's just not a lot of other tight ends, especially those who are being drafted outside the top 6, that give you that type of ceiling. I'm in on Taysom Hill.
I mean, pretty much any tight end that you could automatically pencil in for 8 touches a game would probably be a guy ranked in your top 6. Now, again, because of the fact that, some of these touches are, a lot of these touches are rush attempts, like that you have to factor that in. You're not necessarily getting like PPR upside from Taysom Hill, but like in general, it's interesting.
All right, let's talk about some other winners from training camp, including some receivers for the New England Patriots. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But unfortunately, with the playoffs winding down, we just have fewer and fewer games to watch. and the sports aren't sporting the way we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and I can dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. Go check out some of those NFL lines. They have preseason lines up. They have futures lines at every single game of the NFL season. Those lines are posted. You can also be betting on some of the Summer Olympics. There's so many good things to check out with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. On tomorrow's show, we're going to take a look at some training camp losers from week 2, so make sure you tune in for that. But Kate, let's finish up here with some receivers for the Patriots that are getting some attention.
There are a couple of Patriots receivers getting attention. I'm just going to kind of throw out a blanket statement in here and say pretty much anybody not named Juju Smith-Schuster is probably a winner in terms of the Patriots receiving core. Now, I'm not here to say that everybody on the Patriots receiving core is a buy, but I do want to say that the Patriots receiving core is particularly interesting because we are getting a lot of really positive hype. Jalen Polk has been touted as kind of the lead receiver to this point through training camp and has been dubbed the best wide receiver so far through training camp, has had some really nice highlight plays pop up. But you look at like from a dynasty perspective, been pretty explosive overall, has second round draft capital. Like he does tick a lot of these boxes. And coming out, we weren't overly excited about like his upside for fantasy, but I think we can all picture this realm where like if he is the leading receiver for this offense, even one that like has a lot of question marks, we're big believers in Drake May long term, though a bit of a raw prospect at this point that, you know, I think they're not pushing to come along super fast. They're giving him time to sit. They've got a really good quarterback in Jacoby Brissett who can produce fantasy viable receivers. Like there's a non-zero chance that, you know, one of these guys at least emerges as a potential flex play on a weekly basis here. I think almost especially if we see Jacoby Brissett under center, but like all of these guys have pretty low ADPs right now.
And you made the point, like I would be shocked if Jacoby Brissett's not starting early in the season, Kate, and I would be not shocked. I would be surprised if he's not the starter going into like week 4. It just seems like Drake May is going to be given a lot of time because I think he needs it, right? And you mentioned the ADP, like all of these receivers are cheap. Now we're going off of July Dynasty ADP, but Jalen Polk is being drafted as wide receiver 52. Demario Douglas is wide receiver 69. You know, even somebody like Javon Baker, who I know has had a strong camp as well. I saw a report yesterday, I think it was from Mike Reese, who said that nobody's been able to cover him one-on-one, is being drafted as wide receiver 73. So if you want to just grab 2 of these receivers that are, again, not Juju, just to be clear, not Juju Smith-Schuster. I know. It sounds like he's pretty much done there. If you want to grab 2 of these young receivers, whether it's Pop Douglas or Polk or Javon Baker or even Kendrick Bourne, and just wait and see how it goes, I wouldn't be surprised if 2 of these guys end up becoming fantasy useful or fantasy relevant, and it costs you almost nothing to acquire them.
Yeah, I think very interesting point. Just to kind of share directly from the horse's mouth, from Pat's pulpit, I'm hoping I'm not going to butcher his name here, Bernard Buchmasser. I hope I'm not butchering that, but over Pat's pulpit, hashtag SB Nation, our friendly Patriots site here, had a lot of really nice to say. Listed the wide receivers as kind of the good of training camp, young wide receivers. He said, for years, the Patriots have struggled to properly find and develop young wide receivers through the draft. Time will tell whether their recent investments will break this trend, but early signs are encouraging. Rookies Jalen Polk and Javon Baker have performed well thus far. Sophomore Demario Douglas looking like a potential number 1 wide receiver for the team in 2024. Now, Demario Douglas, a guy that we saw a lot of flashes from last year, who I think is probably especially worth mentioning, like he's a really small dude, 5'8", 170 pounds. Like he's not like a Javon Baker type that you're going to put along the outside and let him win one-on-one. And like, no, but he's a guy that I could potentially see this, offense just kind of like orchestrate some layup touches for, right? And
I agree.
he could
Yeah.
be, I think, a pretty interesting option, especially in full PPR scoring formats.
I'm excited. I think I'm more excited to see this wide receiver core in the preseason because we probably will see a lot of Drake May. Maybe we'll see some Jacoby Brissett. We'll certainly see some Joe Milton. I want to see which of these receivers emerges in the preseason because I think they're all going to play, and that'll give us a pretty good sign as to where these wide receivers are going. Any final thoughts, Kate, before we head out?
I just want to get your last pick. So based on their current ADP, Jalen Polk, wide receiver 52, Javon Baker, who is right now wide receiver 73, and then Demario Douglas, wide receiver 69. Which of these players do you like? Douglas?
Yeah, still.
Okay.
I was really impressed by him as a rookie. Then he got banged up. He's probably the one that I want to bet on right now.
Okay, Demario Douglas, you heard it here first, folks.
Well, he's also pretty cheap. He's one of these guys that you put on your roster for 3 or 4 weeks. If it's not happening, he's not getting touches, you move on. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he's going to be a pretty useful fantasy asset right away. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen today. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the description, so you don't need to actually go out and search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go check out the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check us out on YouTube as well. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. You can check her out at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you tomorrow discussing the biggest training camp losers so far.